If you clicked this video, you've either just purchased or are planning to purchase a racing aftermarket clutch, and congratulations, I'm sure you'll love it. But you've come to this video because either between the manufacturing info or somewhere on the internet, you heard that before you slam everything back together and drop it in the car, you really should check and do some measurements to see whether or not you need to put a shim behind your clutch slave cylinder so that everything works properly. The goal for these measurements is to check the relationship between the clutch fingers of your diaphragm spring and your clutch slave cylinder and its throwout bearing. And this is a precision measurement, so fractions of an inch or millimeters, which I'll be using for this video, do matter. As a result, you need to have everything torqued down to spec in order to get the most accurate measurement that you can. So on the engine side, that means we're going to have installed and torqued down the flywheel, installed the clutch with its alignment tool, and got the pressure plate all set to torque. Next, we're going to need the bell housing on my engine because this is a removable bell housing car. For anybody wondering, this tool is super weak and I'm barely giving it a tap, so I'm probably only putting 5 or 10 foot-pounds into this. That said, we do have to manually torque these down with a torque wrench because this is also a part of that precision measurement. With the bell housing installed and torqued to spec, we're now ready to take our first measurement. We'll call it measurement A. And what we're doing is going from where the transmission mounts to the bell housing here to the fingers of this diaphragm spring, specifically the inner ring right here where your throwout bearing would ride. And in order to do that, we're going to need a couple things. Of course, a pencil and paper to take notes of what measurements we get. You're also going to need a measuring device, whether you use a digital caliper or a tape measure. Either one will work. A digital caliper will be a little bit easier or more accurate to use in this case, and you can find these on Amazon for only about 15 bucks. I'll put a link in the description. Also, you're going to need some sort of sturdy, rigid surface, and it needs to be the same height. A caliper has this piece here that sticks out, and so that is what I'm going to use to take the measurement. How I'm going to do that is by placing this along the bell housing and aligning this up, and then I'm just going to push it, which will cause it to move forward until we make contact there. And that's going to give us our series of measurements. Then you're going to repeat this process several times so that you can get a good representational average of what that depth is, because it may be slightly different if you measure from here than if you measure from here. What I personally did was I took 12 measurements at the clock hour hands. I then took off the highest and lowest to give me the middle 10, and I averaged those. Now all that's left is to use your measuring tool to measure the width of the object that you put across the bell housing to get your measurements. You're going to subtract this from your measurements, and that is going to give you measurement A. Now it's on to the transmission side measurement. We'll call this measurement B. First up, we have to have our slave cylinder installed and tightened down, and then we have to bottom out the cylinder here, which can move up and down. It's going to come with a spring on it initially, like so, and we're going to have to remove this spring. It's actually very easy to do. To remove the spring, just apply a light pulling force and then rotate the throwout bearing, and it will hit a point where it comes loose. Your cylinder has a little pin on it right here, which will keep this in place, but when you pull it past a certain point, there's a exposed area, so you can essentially drop the spring out and then put it back together without it, like this. That lets you bottom it out all the way. You need to make sure there's no space whatsoever around this. If there is, your measurement's going to be off. If it won't bottom out after you remove the spring, you may need to remove the bleeder lines because it could be holding some pressure. Once it's all bottomed out, you'll be left with this. We're going to make sure it's pressed down all the way, and then we're going to take a measurement from the throwout bearing here to the transmission mating surface here. To get this measurement, we can use all the same tools, but you do want to take care not to scratch or score this surface or your throwout bearing. So my cork-backed ruler is actually going to work out perfectly here. I can just set it directly on that surface, and then you're just going to make it flush with that throwout bearing. Make sure that it's not cocked. Keep it nice and even on both sides. So apply gentle pressure there. Then we'll take our tape measure, or in this case our caliper, we're going to pull it down and get that depth gauge to come out of the bottom. And we're just going to take that, place it on our ruler, and then push it down until it meets with the bell housing mating surface like so. And that is our measurement. Like before, you'll want to take multiple measurements and average them. All that's left is to take measurement A, subtract measurement B, and that's going to give you your tolerance and the difference between those two. You can then take those numbers to your clutch manufacturer and they'll be able to tell you whether or not you're in spec and whether or not you need a shim. Each clutch manufacturer has different specs, so don't use what you find on the internet. Directly ask their support team. It is worth the trouble. In my case, I was off by almost a full 1/4 of an inch, and so Monster Clutch, which is who I went with, machined me this really nice shim. And this shim goes behind your clutch slave cylinder to put you back into the right tolerance for their clutch unit. To install, you're just going to remove the screws holding the clutch slave cylinder on and pull it off. Then position your shim. Mine is machined with a lip so it hangs on to the transmission. And finally replace your slave cylinder. Do keep in mind that depending on the thickness of the shim that you needed, your OEM bolt may now be a little too short and not have as good thread engagement. So in my case, I ran up to the hardware store and matched a bolt that was about a 1/4 inch longer so that I will still have the same amount of thread engagement as I had before. And we're just going to run these in and get them nice and tightened down. And one more thing, don't forget to pull this back off and install your spring again. And that is how you measure for, and if necessary, install a shim for your clutch slave cylinder so that your new racing clutch performs great. If you want to see my drift car performing, check out this video, or if you want to see some sim content from me, check out this one over here. Thank you guys for watching. Hit like if this video helped you out, and I will see you next time. Peace.